solve this murder. Here.
All right. Am I audible then?
Yes.
Okay, great. Starting soonish. We have to prove here from opening argument, not that beyond reasonable doubt that the gang member is the murderer, just that on the balance of probability, it is comparatively more likely. Note that more likely doesn't have to be significantly more likely. It can be if we're able to convince you that the odds are 50.0001 to 49.9999, whatever, Gov takes the debate, right? So then why is the gang member comparatively more likely? I think on motive and incentives, obviously we're going to agree that both suspects have some credibly sounding motives, i.e. some grievances as to why they would benefit from the mayor being gone. So we're not going to spend too much time on that. More relevant in the realm of comparing the two suspects then is the question of who is more likely to choose murder as a pathway to address those grievances. So how likely are they to choose to kill somebody over these grievances? And we think it's quite obvious that it's going to be the gang member. Why? One, it's the go-to choice for gang members to deal with unpleasant actors. Like, this is likely the way they dealt with rival gangs before, political actors in the past. If you piss off a gang member, you're gonna assume you're gonna get killed, right? Also, just within gang culture,
Right.
you're encouraged. This is an encouraged means for conflict resolution. Killing enemies is a pathway to gain status within the gang. Many gangs even make membership contingent on you having killed before. So it's not like they're, conceptually estranged from the concept of murder. The software guy, however, is not as much, familiar with the concept of killing people. Why? One, even if there's strong motivation and there's strong benefit from like the mayor being gone, usually the way that political actors who are like economically entangled with other political actors deal with that is not murder. You're much more likely as like a business guy who's fallen out with the mayor, they've found it before, is either release scandals or I don't know, some research that you've had. You're likely to fund a political opponent. You're likely to drag them to the press, use your economic and political levers that you have to trash this opponent, especially if they're going after you and being unpleasant. So there are like a bunch of things that the software guy would do as any other person in that position would do rather than opt for like direct murder. Second, then, is the question of the capacity to execute such a murder. I think it's quite intuitive for us to claim that the gang is likely to be much more able to professionally kill a person. One, the framing in the info slide already tells us gang presence exists there. What that means is that they've practiced an expertise. They're an established presence in this city. This means they're good at being a gang and has sort of like survived through some sort of Darwinian selection process over time. As in, they were the best at being a mean gang, which is why they're still around to be the big mean gang in town, right? Note that this is additionally true for the present moment in time. There had already been a crackdown on the gang by the mayor before, which means there has been more selection pressure to select for the better gang members. Everybody who's like a shitty gang member that let himself be caught is already caught,
Right.
which means everybody who's now still out there is like really, really good at being a gang member. And like all these like incentives and capacity questions of how good are they to execute a murder where they aren't caught, etc., and where there is no evidence, no witnesses, no like camera footage catching them in the act, means that the fact that this has been done so professionally without a clear like catching them in the act or witnesses, etc., all that points to the all that points to the gang member being much more likely. Now let's look at the crime itself, i.e., why was a high degree of professionality necessary to pull off the act in the way it was? One, we know that there were not more than one murder victims who were murdered with two different means of murdering, i.e., if this was just a software guy who picked up a gun, then he'd be like, oh no, there's a bodyguard, one that's obviously a huge strength, especially if you think, oh yeah, I'm gonna kill my friend, or I'm gonna kill my friend who's protected by a professional bodyguard. Obviously, you don't think you have the ability to overwhelm a bodyguard in the middle of the night who's on the lookout because you know they're under threat because you're in a risky area and a politically exposed person. That means the fact that first the bodyguard was killed with nobody hearing it, nobody noticing it, and nobody other shots being fired or you being wounded means that surely there's gone some planning and expertise necessary to execute it. And then secondly, the second crime, i.e. the murder of the mayor itself, was done how? With a different means. That means it was very deliberate to choose two different murder weapons. What that means and why this also points them to the gang member is because the murder point of the gang isn't just to get rid of this one guy who was being annoying. It's about sending a political message that this mayor and mayors like this who try and crack down on the gangs as this mayor has done. They want to deter other actors from following in that path. That means it wasn't a clean shot in the head, immediately dead. No. was a dragged out process with multiple stab wounds. Why? Because you want this to be a cruel process. Also note, even though it took like 15 minutes for this guy to bleed out to death after being stabbed many times, and they didn't or weren't able to reach out for help there. It means that this murderer very professionally knew how to harm him in such a way where the suffering was going to be extended, but he was incapacitated enough to not be able to call out for help. This all points to you having done this before, knowing A, how to send the message, and where the pressure points are where you suffer, but you don't immediately die. The particular cruelty of this act, and like also points to the gang here being like the more likely. Secondly, the fact that there's an absence of witnesses and your ability to avoid the security and avoid the security cameras that were there also point that. Why? Because one, you need the knowledge and how to avoid them in the first place. And secondly, the very fact that then you have also orchestrated it in such a way that not only have you been able to avoid, you also have planned it in a way that nobody else. Before I continue, closing opposition.
The political sentiment that you send seems quite counterintuitive. If the public already hates and fears criminals, you then kill the mayor. Likely that hate and resentment goes up. You vote for another mayor that cracks down. You end up in the same situation.
I don't think that's likely to be true. One, because sentiment is usually anti-gang in most cases. Yeah, usually there is not good community relations between gang and the public. There's always public sentiment to be anti-gang. But the way that gangs then evade crackdown is by either A, paying everybody off who is in the place to do that, or instilling such a culture of fear that people know even if I were to try and act on public sentiment and public will here, the fear of death, which is what happens to you if you actually try, is enough for you to not actually crack down. Now, the one guy who stepped out of this, who did try and crack down, did die violently. That means there is no state capacity to protect you from the murder of these gangs. I think that is what it also then makes it more likely. Secondly, then, or lastly, on the likelihood of capture and the credibility of alibis. When you choose to actually murder someone, and this was a deliberate act, not a crime of passion, you've planned this, you've gone there, killed not one, but two guys. You think, how likely am I to be able to get away with this? A gang member that is as in the most cliche way ever, oh yes, I was at dinner with other gang members, they think I have a credible alibi. I know I've rigged the political system. I know I can intimidate judges, juries, etc. I don't think I will ever get away with this. A software guy who doesn't have all these things doesn't think they can get away with it, which is also the reason why they're much less likely to opt for murder as a means to resolve this. Proud to opening government.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fantastic speech. To open the case for state opposition, I would like to invite leader of the opposition. Here.
Alrighty. For the motion, the balance of probabilities on our side. Gov has to prove that it's more likely. We can just prove that it's equal and still win on our side of the house. But we'll obviously prove that it's more than just likely on our side, and we'll explain why. First, on some ref to what we hear out of OG. I think the first claim they give you is that the go-to choice of a gang is for murder. But I think this is broadly asserted. The only mechanism here is that gangs have murdered in the past, but I'm not sure why their go-to choice is murder. And we'll contend throughout this speech that gangs are likely to actually be quite competent. Per the mechanism you hear out of OG, of this Darwinian selection that means that they've survived for so long, I'm not sure why they would do something rash and murderous as opposed to something strategic. So, especially since time has passed and it's been 2 months since the crackdowns have started on their gangs, I think they will do something much more clean and much more strategic if they wanted the mayor or if they wanted the government to stop cracking down on them. And there's a lot of reasons why this specific action is unlikely to be strategic in stopping these types of crackdowns, which we'll bring to you in our positive. So this assertion doesn't stand. But secondly, I think there's a lot more reasons why the go-to choice would be murder for the software company CEO. 3 reasons. Firstly, he's been characterized as greedy and corrupt by a mayor who we have no reason not to trust. And the mayor seems to think that he's done things like tax evasion, done things that are corrupt, and done things that are not in line with what you should normally act as a human being with dignity for other human beings. As such, we think that it's probably likely that he doesn't have a huge respect for other people, and he has the disposition to do these types of bad things because he's greedy, because he could be corrupt, because he doesn't always have other people's interests at heart. We also know that he's quite irrational, right? This is something that's happened 2 days after the mayor decided he wanted to like cut off this multi-million-dollar deal with him. I think acting rash and acting immediately is something that's more likely to lead to murder than like a planned out crime, because a planned out crime probably takes more strategy. You probably want to exile the mayor or do something like have someone else come into power such that you can still stay strong as a gang. I think also just the emotional aspect, which we'll explain more to you in the motives of the computer software. But I think the fact that he's likely to be emotional, specifically because it is a friend of his, this is likely to be a crime of passion. And especially because of the way the murder was taken out, we think this is true. Okay, firstly, on motives then. We think there's 2 reasons for the gang to have wanted to do this. The first is to impede government opposition to their gang. But the reason this doesn't work is because, as I flagged, we're going to frame this gang as quite competent. I think, again, the Darwinian selection they prove, the fact that it's a big gang who's stayed here for a long time means they have institutional knowledge on how to succeed as a gang that's been passed down. And as per the intuition that is very clearly pointed out, I don't think it's likely that killing the mayor is going to succeed for you. There's smart enough to know this won't work because it creates just more paranoia. So the next mayor who comes in is likely to be a lot more scared of the gang or a lot more oppositional to the gang because he knows he's in the place of someone who's historically been killed. And secondly, I think it just increases the support for tough on crime. When you realize gangs aren't just killing people within other gangs or other people within the neighborhood, but they're killing people in positions of power. This makes people explicitly scared because normal civilians see mayors and see people in position as power as people they can trust, as people they should rely on. And I think when gangs are killing these types of people and destabilizing democracy, destabilizing strong industries that are already established, I think this creates a lot more fear. So you increase political will to vote against to vote for people who are going to crack down on the gangs. I think also in framing that they're incompetent, I think they likely would have done it earlier, right? I think this is more exogenous for the executive, but if it's been 2 months of them 2 months of these crackdowns occurring, I don't understand why they would have taken 2 months to decide that they're going to just randomly kill them and have a fine, decent alibi and not something stronger. I'll take OG.
You do see how the timing actually does point to the gang again, because they've waited until there is another credible suspect, a day after you've publicly trashed somebody else. That is the time to strike. That is why they've waited so long.
Yeah, okay, then your signaling point doesn't stand. Because if you think that the fear comes from the fact that someone is going to kill the mayor and then they want to pawn it off on someone else, then there's no motive for them to do this because they're not signaling jack shit. They're basically just saying that this mayor has failed for some reason. The thesis of the signal would be to say specifically that the gang members, the mayor is someone who's bad and you should be scared of the gang if you're going to crack down on the gang as a mayor. But if it's some CEO doing it, then what's the point? And this isn't stopping. If you think that the reason for killing them is just to stop this mayor from continuing to crack down, we've already proven why you're just likely to increase more crackdowns in the future. So there's no motive left over for you if that's where you want to stand. Cool. Why are the motives of the computer software so much stronger then? A, you just used to be friends with this person. It's statistically true that most murders happen between 2 people that know each other. That is to say that this sense of betrayal and the emotional feeling of one just being called greedy and corrupt by an ex-friend, but also something just moved and it freaked me out. Greedy and corrupt by an ex-friend, but also being betrayed on something that is your livelihood. You're the CEO of a company and now your ex-friend is doing something that's going to take down millions of dollars for you. Also, you might be exposed for being like a felon and a tax evader and a corrupt person. These are all really immediate harms to you that are very scary and very proximate. So you're going to act quickly because you feel as though you're backed into a corner. Specifically when you're being publicly accused of things, this is when people act quickly the most fast. It's protected. So I think you're likely to commit the crime of passion more likely. But looking at the facts of the case then, why is this actually just more true? I think when you look at the gunshot versus the stab wound, I think the bodyguard is just being shot to cleanly move someone out of the way, whereas stabbing someone multiple times clearly indicates passion. There's no reason, particularly since their signaling point doesn't stand, why someone would stab someone 5 times, if not being explicitly mad at someone and wanting to express that sort of anger through a physical act. But I also think the very fact that the bodyguard was standing away and was shot in the back of the head indicates that you had to have some intimate knowledge of the house such that you could enter from behind where the bodyguard was, which you can only access as someone who is friends and who has been in that house often and many times. But even then, the only other way to do this is to have the trust of the bodyguard. So perhaps the bodyguard saw the friend and thought, oh, this is just a friend. This is fine. They can be allowed in. And as such, they were able to kill them from behind when they turned away. I think all the facts point to the likelihood of it being the bodyguard. Super proud out of OO.
Okay.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fantastic speech. To continue the case for site government, DPM, you're here.
Okay. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, hear you and see you.
3, 2, 1. I'll chat about 2 questions. First, which motivations align more with which of the characters? Second, which facts of the case indicate that one was able to do it more than the other? I'll notice that OO is entirely on the first clash. We're going to win on both. We're going to explain why, regardless of who you think is more likely, as long as you think there's some likelihood that either one does it, the facts of the crime indicate that it is only a gang member that could have done it on the second clash. But first, I want to engage on the motivations question. And Mickey, this is quite important. There are 4 different ways to win this clash, and you should track how independent each one of them is in the way that I engage with OO right now. The first question is on a balance of incentives for whom is it more worth it? And here it is true that opposition has some credible claims. Maybe you have some personal vendetta against him. Maybe you're scared of the fact that he's going to undermine you. The issue is that they never contrast it with the costs that exist for someone to kill a mayor that they themselves then outline. The cost of my company share tanking, the cost of likely being fired by a top-down nomination. Because even if there's reasonable doubt, even if it's not complete doubt, even if by some point the gang leader gets chosen, but there's enough news cycles that make me seem guilty or make me seem complicit in this, which makes customers turn away from me for a certain period of time, the harm to my company and my professional etiquette is much larger than the possibility of a tax evasion or some scandal being brought up, which I can undermine through lobbying, as Victor already explains, versus the fact that I can't undermine through lobbying or through getting certain other politicians elected, the fact that customers distrust me fundamentally at that point. Compare this with what happens to the gang criminal. They say the problem is that this skepticism of the crowd towards the gang criminal also makes it so that there is more anti-crime sentiment. Problem. First, anti-crime sentiment affects the gang leader much more. As Victor explains, there's already a sufficient intensity to want to pursue gangs. So the ones you weren't able to pursue, the ones you weren't able to take out are probably resilient in the way that they've embedded in other underworld gangs and in other underworld networks. So the harm to hating them more is lesser. But second, we actually think this is a reason for why you want to flip the narrative. The fact that the crackdowns were so intense in the past indicates that there probably is already an ascription and a blame accredited to those gangs and undermining networks of the city. So what do you do at that point? You do exactly what Annika says. You place it exactly at the time in which it makes sense for the software engineer to do it. You do things like indicate a crime of passion intently while doing things that a crime of passion wouldn't do, like kill someone very quickly and leave quickly, in order to sow enough doubt in the minds of the public to say, the mayor tried to disempower us, the gangs, but the mayor was now murdered. Are we the actual problem? Probably not. Maybe it's the software bros. Maybe it's the tech bros who are the problem. Meaning that a next mayor who campaigns on sowing reasonable doubt on whether the problem was to begin with the gangs or the tech bros deviates attention away from the gangs and at least poses a possibility of solution to decrease the measures that are taken against gangs to begin with, which is why on worthwhileness, it's much greater on their side. But the second way we win this is that even if for both of them, it's worthwhile to kill him, we just say that there's a difference between, and like, let's not accept this leftist bullshit. I'm sorry. Someone could be a capitalist pig, but not want to get their hands dirty. Like, that's what Victor says. The intuition of killing someone, of seeing them grovel and beg, of seeing them cry, of seeing blood on my hands, and of doing all of this in 12 minutes is an intuition that most people, no matter how cutthroat they are, do not have. He says that it's true, Annika says it's not the automatic reaction to kill, but it is a possible reaction that a gang member has and a gang leader has. Whereas most people's intuitions align away from performing this action on their own. And notice that the info slide excludes oppositions from saying that you contract someone else to do it. So they need to explain why it's perceived as a possible path for you.
Wait.
Third way to win this. Say he can do it and say it's worthwhile for the software bro. We say that the difference is that he has alternatives of how to undermine, whereas the gang leader doesn't. He lacks the capital to perform meaningful lobbyism. He lacks the federal connections in order to get top-down lobbyism. He lacks the, as Annika concedes, trust and knowledge of the politician in order to dig up other dirt that will make the politician be impeached or scandalized and distrusted, whereas the gang leader doesn't know all of these things and doesn't have the capital to scandalize, so this is the only way to disempower the gang leader. They say, why would they want to disempower the mayor? The gang leader has already been struck. The reason is, first, the strong personal vendetta that they explained. My own members of my gang were killed directly by this mayor. I want to strike back. I don't care about consequences. But second, because clearly, as I've explained before, the reattribution of guilt to the tech bro is a benefit in terms of the chance that other crackdowns happen. And third, and importantly, Annika says that if we say the public isn't sure if it's the gang member, we undermine our signaling case. This doesn't understand the fact that we said the signaling is not towards the public. It's towards other underworld actors. If I engage in a drug deal and that guy knows he gave me magnums and I gave him cocaine in return, and he knows that the murder weapon that killed the bodyguard was a magnum, he knows that I can do to him what I did to the mayor. I don't need the public to know that in order for underworld credibility to increase. We win on 4 different accounts in the motivations question, bottom half.
How easy is it for a gang member in this type of city to move around and plan murders compared to how easy it is for someone else to avoid the police?
Good question. Good question. Let's talk about facts of the case. They say he has no capacities to do this because he is neutered, he is defanged, his gang was undermined. First issue with this. Game plans for invading into a mayor's home are usually developed before such events happen as a sort of fail-safe measure in order to know that you can strike back against the mayor. This is often how passive lobbying between gangs and mayors work, because you want to make it clear that you have a capacity to execute political violence, even in the case where a mayor cracks down against you, which is why in many cases breaks into the apartment were accumulated through knowledge, as Annika says, that existed before the gang was weak in its current form, which means that you're able to use those fail-safe gangs and those fail-safe connections that are still maintained. Second, we say that the members who have survived maybe aren't plentiful, but are the most skilled at evasion, which is why the capacity to execute is exactly of those that have invaded previous high-ranking mentions and know the skill to do that, because these are the ones that would have evaded from the police. Compare this with the capacities they need to prove. I just want you to understand the burden of proof on Gov. The motion says that they didn't contract another gang member. So they need to prove that the tech bro knows how to do all of the characteristics of the case that Victor has outlined. Laura is smiling because other than this being a crazy motion, it's also an insanely Gov-biased one. He needed to have done this in 12 minutes. He needed to have had the crime of passion without talking or confronting him. He needed to kill him in 2 minutes. He needed to know where to shoot him such that he would survive for 15 minutes, but wouldn't survive long enough to get to the phone or would be paralyzed to do so. Which tech bro knows how to do that, my guys? For those reasons, opening government.
I would like to thank the DPM for that fantastic speech. To conclude the top half of this debate, I would like to invite the DLO here.
Okay, hello. One sec. In any trial case, one of the most important things to consider is the quality of the alibis presented. Government does not spend time talking on this, and I think this is what's going to lose them the front half of the strat. I'm going to start this case by analyzing the 2 alibis and explaining why the one on government is so much worse, and then I'm going to rebuild our case and refute what you hear from them, talking about the motive and the capacity to commit the crime. Starting first with the alibi, we get two stories from the mayor, and this is clear smoking gun evidence that the mayor was responsible for this crime to actually begin with. First, he says that he was sleeping at home, relaxed, fall asleep, and in the second story, he changes this to say instead that he was awake, stressing for a business meeting, and that he could not go to sleep, and that he was working on this task instead, that he was busy preparing for some presentation or something like that. You changing an alibi when you're asked for a crime is incredibly difficult to do if you weren't responsible for a crime. Because if you were actually sleeping, how would you come up with an alternative story, or what interest do you have to actually do this? Why is it likely that the alibi of the mayor changed, considering that they did this crime? How could they be so incompetent? The first is obviously because they are not an expert criminal. They are not able to maintain the lies or consider ahead of time how they should plan these things. Because he only had 2 days since this happened, he was probably in a fit of rage and was emotionally incapable of actually preparing for this crime in detailed ways, at least mentally. So there's 3 other reasons though here. First, is this likely just a Freudian slip of this person kind of revealing what they're actually doing? Because to say you are preparing for a business meeting and you are stressed about this is to say you are prepared to kill the mayor, you are preparing your weapons, you're preparing your strategy, you're preparing your infiltration plan. This was you secretly revealing what you actually had to say. The second is the mayor might be secretly proud of the accomplishment that they had and wanted to talk about in some way to say, I was actually preparing for this meeting and wanted to speak up about this. The third is that often it is easier for people to defend lies that are closer to the truth. So people will try to lie in ways that are similar to reality to say, I was up preparing. This is a way in which I was preparing for this then. Why exactly also is the alibi that you hear from the mayor so vastly insufficient, considering what they claim to have been doing? If it were the case that they were asleep, this should be clearly capturable on the security cameras that exist within the house that they already have. So it's clearly not part of this motion because it's pointed out on Gov that the security cameras were off in the restaurant, but clearly they were on in the house. And if they're on in the house, you should be able to see that the mayor never left the house to begin with. That should be in the info slide if it were to be true. But second, if the mayor were actually awake and were working, you would see Slack messages. You would see the logs on Google Docs or calendar or slideshow to show that they were sending messages or typing, or that their computer was open at specific times. That should also be open. That should be part of the alibi that the mayor was giving to the police when actually asked. Why is their alibi decent or good to prepare against like closing government, I think? Because OG is losing on this clash clearly. The first is that there were many people involved on their alibi. So you have many gang members or individuals who are at the restaurant to say this. We think it's likely or less likely that all of them would agree. There's probably a high probability that one of them would snitch to avoid getting into more trouble, or often because the police would offer them a good deal to say something about this. But secondly, the head chef, who is not a part of the gang, was also physically present and had claimed to have seen that person was actually there. On weighing, the alibi is so clearly terrible for the tech software CEO, the fact that he lied and switched his story. How do you weigh this in the round? I think we win this debate without even having to talk about the 2 other clashes, because a direct lie is a certain smoking gun on the balance of probabilities that is far more likely that the CEO was the one responsible for the crime because they legit changed the message which they had actually said. That outweighs any discussion of motives or crime details, where I think both teams have similarly good quality analysis, but on the ground of the alibi, which is the most obvious, it's clear that this is going in the favor of opposition. I'll take opening.
The issue with one half of your claims is that it exactly falls into our explanation that you want to establish credence in the fact that it was the tech bro and not you, which is why you have different CCTV cameras. The problem with your other half is that you assume the info slide has to include something. Maybe it does. Who knows?
No, but like even if you don't buy that part of it, it seems really sus that they would change their message. I didn't understand what you meant on the first part. I don't think like the CEO has any incentive to change his alibi. Okay, 2 clashes in this round then. The first is the likelihood of the motive. And I want to talk about who to fear first, because it seems the government has a case on making people scared to avoid the amount of crackdowns on the gangs that already exist. Firstly, there's the question of time frame. The fact that it was 2 months rather than 2 days means that they likely didn't have a reason to do this before, and so it's not clear why that would change now. If you wanted to get away with the excuse to say that the CEO was actually responsible, this takes away from the entire messaging point that they talk about, because they should be taking credit for the message instead. If people want to know which gang to be afraid of, because presumably there are multiple gangs in the city. You need to take credit for yourself for you to be the one gang that is protected, rather than cracking down on all gangs instead. But secondly, on their path to victory, to say you want to just scare people and get underworld credit anyways, if you are telling people in the underworld that you did this and taking credit, that information will likely be leaked to the government anyways by some competing gang who has an incentive for them to crack down on this specific gang instead. So that takes down their path to victory. The other thing they say here is that alternatives exist for the CEO, but not for the gang. That's obviously not true. Anna explains how you can pay off other individuals in specific cases, like, for example, smaller people who are responsible for, like police officers, for example, in the cases of specific crimes and whatnot. But furthermore, on the likelihood of motives, 2 pieces of framing. One is crimes are often done in irrational ways. Nobody murders with a plan or to do this rationally. It's often because they are in the heat of the moment, emotional about their friendship, which had lasted for many years, suddenly flipping to be publicly called greedy and corrupt in the public to someone who had trusted you further massively, or the fact that you are frustrated because the deal that you were promised has suddenly gone away and the business you worked so hard for is suddenly collapsing and not ending up well. So most murders are personal, and I think it's more likely that this actually exists. This is shown in the evidence in a few ways. The first is probably the fact that like they used a knife instead of a gun. They used the gun to kill the first person, but the knife because it was personal. If it were truly an expert gang member involved, they would shoot the mayor first and then stab them to get the message clear. But this person was clearly not experienced to risk not killing them immediately, but to stab them to begin with. But secondly, the fact that the bodyguard was shot in the back of the head means that the bodyguard had the trust of the individual they had visually seen enter the house, because it was probably the friend and the CEO who they didn't think would be likely to actually kill them. So the bodyguard was not paying attention, was easily able to be killed. If it was a gang member with wearing like a mask or some shit, like that would never actually be able to get passed away with. Then to refute their path to victory is here. They say, one, the likelihood of the cost of this to the CEO. I think this guy is old. I think he's frustrated that his business is failing and middling and not that big. He's probably also overconfident that he's able to get away with this crime considering his likely relative success in the past. So I just don't think he cares that much and is likely to want to do this anyways and kill these individuals. So on likelihood of motives, we're beating them on their case too. Finally, on capacity, they have claims to say that the gang member is the only one who's knowledgeable and able to do this. I think on the flip, you need to be familiar with the home of the mayor, which is probably highly protected, has many security cams, so you need to know the layout. Probably only the CEO, who is the friend of the mayor, would be familiar enough to know the nuances of cameras and avoid all of that action to begin with, but also to not raise the suspicion of the bodyguard to actually start with. And I don't think it's that difficult to kill these two individuals. The first one is just because they trusted you, because they were your friends. And the second is a mayor. This guy is probably like 300 pounds, eats donuts every day, and just like cannot like move a muscle. I don't think it'd be that difficult to kill your friend or catch them off guard with an element of surprise. We proved that the CEO has capacity, has a much stronger motive than that of gangs, which would do this in other more efficient ways. But most importantly, on the basis of the horrible alibi that you get from opening government, clear a win. Thanks.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fantastic speech. Thank you for what was a very interesting top half. To open the second half, member of government here.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
That's perfect. POI, please just write in the chat and please don't unmute yourself. Okay. In this case, I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, in this extension, we will focus about motifs, because note that so far this debate was like, oh, this one is upset, oh no, this one is more upset. Note that here it gets wishy-washy. We will win by saying what are the structural reason for a gang to be actually that mad on the mayor to actually want to kill you. Note that firstly, it means that we will inherently characterize gangs and saying that this killing is literally their survival because there's such an urgency for them to do so. But secondly, know that other teams don't deal with the burden that the city has been dominated by like brutality and things like that have been normalized, or that the alibi is not for sure. Therefore, you need to predict the structural reasons and why the gang is actually that mad. So we will show you on 2 levels of probability and therefore increase it a lot. Why was the gang did this? Firstly, the option is that the gang boss sent you to kill and therefore did it. But secondly, is that you as a gang bro just woke up one day and decided to kill this mayor of the city. All of this is valuable, and this combination just make it more probable. So now let's move to the framing of the city dominated by gangs and why the fact that the mayor decided to crack down on them made them actually so mad and made them want to kill. Know that at the moment, the city is dominated by gangs. It means that firstly, it's extremely corrupted, and you as the gang members can influence other sectors of the business. So it's not only you dominate the administration, but you also start dominating the importing, exporting, making thousand amounts of money, and you simply need to be in this position in order to survive. At the moment, someone like this mayor comes and starts doing massive crackdowns. What you fear is that you will have the next Bukele that will literally, become more and more violent and go on an open war with you as a gang, meaning you as a gang will start losing the power. And now losing the power for you is the actual threat that you simply cannot operate anymore, cannot have the money, and you need this money urgently in order to keep operating the structures you have, keep doing the illegal shit you have, and you cannot move, to the legal businesses because you simply got so used to the fact of how do this. Meaning, summing up, you as a gang can lose everything. On the comparative, the IT guy doesn't have that much to lose, because if he loses the deal, he loses some money, but he can always come back to what he was. So now let's do the first piece of extension, which is why was the gang, the gang boss sent one random guy to kill the mayor. Firstly, note that the gang boss wants to regain the control in order to be able to have all of these amazing benefits of controlling the city. Meaning, the only reason for them is to kill the ongoing mayor, because the mayor that was there probably was threatened. Like, it didn't work. Like, the guy literally had security guards, meaning that he was fearing for his safety. You tried to threaten, did not work. You have to kill him. So at the moment you kill him, what you can do, you can firstly put your candidate, meaning you put someone who will allow doing all of this bad shit to happen in the city. And thanks to this, you can expand your businesses. But secondly, if someone else new comes and even, let's say, wins politically on making this campaign that, oh, I will crack on gas, the fact that wins on this policy doesn't mean that he will do this forever. You can always try to corrupt this new person, you can always try to threaten them, etc. But thirdly, you should show that you simply cannot mess with them. I would like CO.
Does the average gang member hate the police or the mayor more?
I think that the average gang, well, I will put this more in my extension, but not only of hating the police is an extension of the mayor. The mayor is who sent, like, actually the police to threaten you, meaning you also want to kill them. But now I will, that will be the second piece of extension. Coming to what I was saying is that firstly, even if, I just show you why as a gang boss, you feel that you can replace the mayor with your mayor. But even if you say, that it can be difficult and you're scared of doing this, just know how much chaos you cause at the moment you kill the mayor. At the moment you kill the mayor, you show that you cannot mess with others. But secondly, know that there is such a mess in the city that you simply cannot start controlling the other businesses, can't start controlling the import and export, because, for example, the police is simply very busy with trying to find who did this, and the person who did that was a random member of your gang, which you don't care that much, and you as a gang boss will always be safe because you have all of the amazing structures that keep crossing you. So just causing the chaos means an actual benefit for you, and actually slowing the process that is cracking on you, and later expanding your gangs, which we characterize is the urgency you have to do. So the way is, you as a boss, you win a lot of doing this, and you can, if that mission that wouldn't work, you can always replace the random gang member you sent with another one. You always win. But now let's directly respond to the POI. That's why as a new gang member, you can one day just wake up and decide to kill the mayor. Know that firstly, you basically every day wake up and think of how much you kill the mayor, because the mayor does the policies that track down on you, they directly threaten you. But secondly, know that the mayor with his policy probably kills someone who was close to you, your friends and family. You feel this as a direct revenge. That's because it's basically blame your shit life for it. Thirdly, no, I will not bring more POIs. But thirdly, know that you have a likelihood of achieving more if you show to the gang boss that you actually try to do this. This is important because in the gangs, it's crucial to go higher in the hierarchy and to show up what you're doing. Because firstly, this means that your boss will never threaten you, because both gang bosses threaten you in order to motivate you to do so. Now you show I literally killed the mayor and I did something amazing. But secondly, at the moment you advance in the hierarchy, it's crucial to survive because they don't send you to the most shitty missions, the missions where you are more likely to die, etc. But thirdly, know that this is just based on your ego and ambition. Like, you want to show off because you grew up in the culture where everyone around you was showing off in order again to achieve hierarchy and show that it's more and more violent. Now, the last thing in this extension, which is why the IT guy would not lose that much and why the IT guy doesn't have the structural urgency to do this. Note that so far our opening was more focused on that it's only because it's a business, guys, but did not really focus on the info slide and the information we get here, and this will be also direct response to Pablo. Firstly, know that killing here doesn't I help you anyway in the deal. It actually makes it worse because firstly, it shows that you can be a suspect, therefore we cannot, you are interviewed, you cannot develop your company and get the money you could be doing. But secondly, just the investigation, and because people are so focus on the chaos that happened, don't allow you to expand your business, and actually people forget about that because they're so focused on other stuff. But secondly, know that at the moment this is a city that it's focused on violence. You literally could have buy a killer and pay them, which is fairly accessible in that town. So we never know why this actual computer scientist would do this personally. Thirdly, you cannot escape the city because you have the headquarters and all the business who were there. Therefore, you don't want to do anything that would actually threaten your situation. For all of these reasons, CG.
I would like to thank the speaker for the fantastic speech, to open the case for CO, member of opposition.
Dear closing government, there are two things that have happened to both actors in this debate and apply to both of them equally. One, they've both lost power, and secondly, they both have an incentive to create chaos. One, because you're a gang member who wants to send a political message, and the other one because you're somebody who wants to disrupt a piece of legislation that's about to be headed your way. Both of these things happen to both actors. Your mechanisms are largely symmetric. I don't think you contribute much to the debate. Now onto what we're going to give you from closing opposition. We're simply put just going to answer a lot of the likelihood questions that opening opposition points out, says they want to explain, but don't ever prove through actor analysis. They don't fully tell you what the heads of both of these actors are like, what they're likely to think and what they're likely to desire, and what likely pushes them to make decisions. We're going to explain that on, closing opposition. Just a quick example before I actually explain this, Tim. For instance, they say two things which I think are decent. One, they say that we know that this is going to be a greedy and corrupt individual because the mayor said so. Once again, this is speculative. We don't know if just because the mayor said something, we know it to be true. Mayors make mistakes all the time. Mayors say things that are wrong all the time. But secondly, they say this is an irrational actor because it's only 2 days after, his childhood friend turned on him. Once again, this doesn't answer the likelihood analysis that explains why the emotions he feels are strong enough to lead him towards murder in some instances. By giving you the background information for what this actor is likely to feel, we're more likely to prove the likelihood of this, and we're more likely to have a case that's far less speculative than theirs. On to doing that then. Let's get one thing clear. This is a crime that requires great amounts of entitlement and arrogance. You need to think that you're going to get away with it before you actually do this crime, and you need to feel entitled enough to think that you are somebody who is rightful in the action of taking another person's life. That is very, very simple. Two things that are required for this crime to occur. Why? A, because it is incredibly high profile. When a mayor dies, your president is going to talk about it. It is going to be on everybody's feed. It is going to be everywhere. You understand that eyes are going to be on this crime. But B, it is very rare and intricate. It hasn't been done many times before, and you know you likely have to do things like kill a bodyguard. This means that it is a crime that probably requires a great deal of entitlement and arrogance before you even think you could do it. Notably, this murder needed the murderer needed to feel two things. One, he needed to feel hopeless. He needed to feel that there is, nothing else for him to do because there's a billion reasons for him not to do this crime to begin with. Probably it can lead to negative outcomes if you're caught. But secondly, you needed to be massively cocky. If you thought there was even a 10% chance that you would get caught, you likely wouldn't do this. Okay, let's talk about the chief executive officer compared to the gang member and what they're likely to think. One, a chief executive officer grew up massively privileged and exists as a massively privileged individual. What does this look like? A, you're used to the mayor being a good guy who's on your side. Let alone the fact that the mayor was your childhood friend, you also actively grew up with the narrative that law enforcement is good, cops are good, the courts are good. All of these systems exist to protect you from the foul, crooked people who don't do things like uphold the law or follow legal reasoning. Notably, this means that you likely did not feel ever a need or a desire to possibly be threatened by something like legislation. When the mayor then flipped this on you, this probably wasn't something you were used to and can lead to irrational reactions. Notably, a gang member lives their entire life as if a mayor could possibly target them. You understand target you. You fear policing. You fear these other things. This means that this probably isn't just a new thing for you, right? You having people crack down isn't something that you're not used to. It's not something that you haven't seen before. Why do you act in such a rash way as to kill a mayor? Obviously a large and intricate crime. I'm not sure. On the flip side, we have an actor who actively grew up being told that the mayor is supposed to be on your side. When this is flipped on its head, it's turned into something new that you're not used to. That's what creates irrationality, actually answering the questions that OO just rely on without talking about. But B, you are taught to be self-righteous and you're told that your shit doesn't stink. This comes through two mechanisms. One, childhood. You likely grew up as an individual who were told you were going to do great things. You likely went to an elite institution and you likely had parents who bankrolled your capacity to go to these elite institutions to begin with. Notably, most chief executive officers aren't just common people. But secondly, the people who work with you constantly kiss up to you. That is to say, you have people who want to get promoted. The way in which they do this is by letting you beat them at golf. It's by talking to you in nice and sweet ways. You're used to feeling entitled to people being kind to you, and you're used to being entitled to your friends treating you with the utmost respect. Notably, the mayor completely flipped this thing that you were expected to rely upon for the entirety of your life leading up to this moment. Notably, a gang member has the opposite mentality as an actor. Why? Because you are a gang member, Amitai. You're not a gang leader. The info slide doesn't say so. This means that you're used to being told that you're not shit. Gangs are inherently structured in hierarchical ways. You are not somebody who is at the top. You are at the bottom. You are used to having to do things like getting people Coca-Colas or, whiskeys or whatever the hell they want, and you just kind of have to go do it, right? Because you want to be promoted. You're used to being forced to do the shitty job like selling weed on the street. You likely don't want to do these things, but you kind of have to. You're used to having orders barked at you, and you're used to being screwed over. On the other hand, the chief executive officer has the opposite. He's used to people kissing up to him. He's used to being arrogant, and he's used to being overinflated in his ego, and he's used to thinking that he can do great things that other people, simply put, cannot do. And C, you've never tasted defeat in your life. A chief executive officer likely has had a significantly smooth pathway towards these things. It likely doesn't, you likely weren't somebody who grew up being beat up in the street. You likely weren't somebody who grew up poor. A gang member probably did, right? Most gang members don't join for fun. They probably join due to necessity. This means that you're used to tasting defeat, you're used to losing, you're used to being a loser. Okay, why is this good? This means that as a chief executive officer, you lack capacity to envision the best case. At the point at which the mayor said that he was going to turn against you, you couldn't possibly think, I'm probably going to get away with this. You instantly watch your world crumble. You've never in your life been targeted by law enforcement. You start to think that this is going to be the end of me. I'm going to go to prison for 40 years. The gang member, on the other hand, has seen defeat before. He's capable of going, well, yeah, I've been targeted or I've experienced bad things before, but I overcame them. I got better at them. The chief executive officer doesn't have the same mental calculus, which is why he's more likely to be irrational as a human being. Notably, why is it important that the chief executive officer is more likely to be an arrogant actor? Before that point from opening,
nerdy tech CEOs, when political actors turn on them, even when it upsets them, they don't take up arms to murder. They either hire someone, which the info slot excludes, or they write mean tweets, which is why Elon Musk did murder Trump, but wrote the tweet.
He's arrogant. Very, very simple. One, it means that he thinks he can totally pull this off. Likely, he's been told that he's an arrogant person who's been told that he's a person who never has failed before. He thinks this way. But secondly, because he thinks he's so much greater than other people, it forces him to not hire other actors. Notably, he's grown up thinking that he's at the top of the hierarchy, that he's better than everybody else. This means if he hires somebody else, that person is inherently worse than him. They're more likely to screw up the act. They're more likely to rat him out. It is particularly because he's so much better than other people that he feels forced to do it himself because he cannot possibly conceive that other people could be nearly as great at it as he is. It's very, very simple. His childhood and the way that he thinks leads to this. On the comparative, let's say the gang would be likely to do this. It'd be way worse, right? It would be a group decision. You'd do it to send a political message like Victor says. If you want to send a political message, you don't shoot the bodyguard in the head and then kill the guy. You leave the bodyguard alive so he can tell the story and you torture the guy to death, right? You don't fucking stab him. You curb stomp him. You likely tortured people to death before. You know exactly how this is done. Notably, that sends a broader political message. It scares off opposition. It tells other gang members that when we kill people, we do it publicly. And not even the mayor is safe. Imagine what we'd be able to do to you. A political message would have been done in a more graphic way. You likely didn't do it in that graphic way because it wasn't the gang member.
Time. I would like to thank the speaker for that fantastic speech. To conclude the government side, go whip, you're here.
Wait, sorry, my camera is switching on in a very long time. I will move my notes and I will restart it soon. Please polarize on the chat. I will take one shortly, so don't unmute yourself because it's disturbing online debating. Okay. I will start my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So let's start with CO case because I think that it's pretty much very weird and improbable case. If this person believes that his shit doesn't stick in and crime won't matter, and that's why he's so irrational and is doing the crime, we believe that why are you even bothered and scared of the mayor that is putting some accusation out there? As a rich person, you have tons of lawyers and you can have tons of tools, as OG were talking about with corruption, but you can pull him through the mud through his whole life. As a person that is so arrogant and so bad as CO is claiming, you probably want to give him a death penalty because it's too light penalty for the person that is giving you shit. And probably you have tools to make someone's life much more miserable than death. So this person would probably do so by media, by going to the court with him, by defending and staying innocent, but destroying the mayor's career in the next election, or so on, so on, so on. I believe that another thing is the fact that if you are that arrogant case about arrogant youth is actually flippable to our side, because we are talking about special case of arrogance, not the arrogance that, oh, you are very cocky about yourself, but about taking someone's life. As a person that is socialized from the very young age, you are taught that you can't anyone, that you can't kill anyone, that life is the most precious value that we are caring about, and that law enforcement is very strong about chasing people that are doing this penalty, this capital crime. So at the end of the day, we are having a picture of someone that is cocky, but is sheltered, rich guy that was cocky from the very beginning and didn't even hit someone in the, I don't know, in the school when he was young. He didn't have to do any physical things and probably didn't have to go through the things that gang member did a lot. So as a person, you are very firstly in your life killing someone and doing these things. So you can't be arrogant here because this is a known thing. You don't know what kills a person. You don't know when the person is surely dead, and so on, so on. So as a person, as this CEO, you aren't arrogant, but our gang member is, as a person that is growing up with without punishment, without criminal justice even touching him, but he's doing crimes and he's living in society that is telling him that killing someone is not that important. So we believe that on our side, the case of CEO is here. And another thing is, someone is so arrogant. Why the fact he didn't hire anyone? The answer to this question isn't put here as why he would make dirt on his hand and so on. Another thing is the fact that taking a stance that someone is so irrational that he's doing crime is probably really not good strategy in this debate, as pushing a person as an irrational actor is very highly improbable when we are talking about planned murder, as even Owo was saying that thing. So the motive is very important. We believe that the gang member is much more probable because of the motive that we are talking about. And let's go to the weighing of OG. If this first of all, OG is not focusing on motives. It means that if the gang member is actually, if gang's motives aren't aligned with the strategy of killing Mayor, the gang member wouldn't do that because there are very strict policies in the gang member. So Marta's extension is giving you this huge motive that means that the case of some gang member being able to kill him begin even to be probable. Another thing is that the motive of sending a message is much weaker than the motive of survivability of the gang, because message cannot be taken by everyone. It can be strongly misleading, as the opposition were putting, and but survivability is very important. So on the case of urgency and desperation of the gang that needs to survive, and we need to believe that we are winning this debate. Going to the rebuilding and our rebuilding of the case after CEO is proving this even more, because when Mayor is making those bad and effective people in the police work, changing people that was corrupt in the police, I don't know, keeping sergeants that before were giving the gang the ability to smuggle things, or wasn't even taking crimes of gang members in the city, and so on, is changed by people that are actually doing so. The gang is hit very hardly. And notice panel that when gang was hit by this huge crackdown, and the whole survivability of the gang was actually threatened because of the fact that if they took their drugs, these drugs were bought to be sold later on, and you need to later on buy another part of drugs. You have cooperation with gangs from Colombia, from Mexico, and people that you are in debt with, and are highly basing their probability of working on you. So if you are not having stable ability to work, you are highly threatened by the mayor that is such a dangerous person. You need to work, or otherwise the survivability of the gang and of the gang people that are working there is highly threatened, as not only law enforcement compared to, but other gangs too. Open.
In the courtroom, the best way to tell if someone committed a crime is if they change their alibi, especially absent any
explanation. Alibi doesn't really matter, as both alibis are actually pretty bad, and we believe that on our side the alibi case could work, but we are not talking about this person was only sleeping with his house. What the fuck? This is not an alibi. And at the end of the day, so let's talk about those personal things that openings were talking about. We believe that in the both sides, the possibility of killing could happen, and this is very washable. As okay, maybe gang member was better trained, but for example, the fact that someone is murdered is probable too. So at the end of the day, we are not able to like solve the issues of the openings only on the fact that this person is much more capable of killing, as both are capable of killing. The desperation and the issues that gangs are right now having, as the gang is struggling a lot and is having huge issues, is probably the most important in this debate, especially that the IT guy, if he wants to kill Mayor after two days after the Mayor died, after the Mayor said this is war, he actually builds up the rep of the Mayor by making him martyr, by making him person that actually got killed because he was on the case. So other person that could come after this Mayor would probably follow up these things about deal and about corruption of the this IT CEO. So probably he is not gaining anything at the end of the day with the deals, with the political things and so on. The gangs actually are getting because of the fact that of the things that our extension provided, which are probably the most important debate. Thanks.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fantastic speech. To conclude this debate, go whip, here.
Hello, I hope I'm audible. I assume so. I take my POS in the chat exclusively, please. Compromised morals, crime of passion, access to commit the murder, and alibis. From these 4 bullet points, you wouldn't know if I was describing opening government's case or opening opposition's case, which is exactly the reason that we take it over opening opposition, because these bullet points are non-exclusive and there are largely reasons as to why it is that a jury, or the panel in this case, would struggle to figure out which is the most likely to do this, because there are incentives and capacities on both sides of the house on either of these subpoints to exactly explain to you why it is that one actor or the other actor has done this. I'm trusting the panel also specifically to know well enough when it is that opening opposition have flags something, when it is that they say a word to mean something, and when it is that Darren more specifically analyzes why these are the likely reasons or likely scenarios that someone has grown up under, and why these are tipping points and not just, a simple word to describe a situation in a certain status quo. I don't think that is enough to take that debate, and I think that's specifically why the analysis that we provide to you are very important from closing opposition. What is it, therefore, that Darren does so uniquely in this speech? First of all, he tells you why it is that arrogance, entitlement, and cockiness, trust me, Darren knows a lot about this, is reasons as to why it is that you'll do this as a tech guy. But let me paint this picture even more clearly. You're an executive in the most booming industry in the world. You are in a city large enough to have gangs. You sell government contracts. You are probably incredibly rich. You see yourself as part of the elite. You know that you're friends with societally high-standing members, such as future mayors. You see yourself as someone on the inside. When this happens to you, this is not just a stab in the back like what would happen to any other random friendship who falls apart. This is a fundamental turn upside down of your literal world and everything you believe to be within your right. That is exactly why we meet the burden that opening government pull out to say, why could he have done this? Why would this ever be enough? He probably grew up safety and probably never were violent. You would have never had to prove on opposition why he had done those things in the past. You would have had to prove why this is big enough to make him do it in the certain status quo. Look, panel, when people kill their spouses, it's not necessarily because they were always harming them along 10 years down the line. It is because in a moment of rage and fury, you do something that you never thought you could have. In the moment of insanity, when your world changes so significantly, you're able to do these things. That burden of proof were never actually fulfilled on government side, because exactly for the reasons that Darren also tell you, again, round winning from closing opposition. These people have been kicked, bullied, and spat on for the entirety of their lives. Gang members in particular never see themselves as part of the system. They don't believe the system to work in their favor. They're not surprised when the system doesn't work in their favor. On the contrary, they would be surprised if it did. I would be personally surprised if you could find me a gang member who knows the name of my mayor in my city. I think they're so disattached from these people that the people they would want to kill are probably police officers. They're probably the guy very close to them on the street actually enacting these things. The people who they want to scare are the average Joes, not the people really high up in the offices, because as a lot of teams have said, this just doesn't make any difference to you. So more specifically, when your world is turned upside down, you don't have any other options. This is the only challenge we get from CG. Why wouldn't you just do something else? You wouldn't do something else for a lot of reasons. But most intuitively, if a mayor goes out and says this publicly, you probably fucking did it. No fucking politician who was elected recently takes a stab in the dark and turns on their best friend and says they're actually a criminal if they weren't a criminal. So what you're looking at is jail time. And even if you're not, you're looking at the fear of jail time. Even in the best case on government side that you're innocent, the fact that the mayor says this is enough for you to feel the type of betrayal that we're talking about. It is enough for you to feel the type of desperation that will make you do this. Because look, the fear of your reputation being shattered is big enough for us to take this more specifically on closing opposition, because this is exactly the way that you've always seen your life. And that's the reason why turning it upside down is so harmful. Sure, opening government, you want it now or after I respond to you?
Not a question of who you want to kill more. You can do both. The question is, we give reasons why killing him is strategic. You need to explain why the many barriers we prove to, even if there is incentive, the tech pro can't kill, are overcome on your side.
I don't think the barriers are significantly high, right? We already understand that he has a way to enter the house. We already understand that he knows the house and has probably been there before. What he has to have done is get a gun and get a knife. Very easy to do at the point at which you're rich, you're entitled, you know you can get things, you probably have a lot of connections, you know people across the world, right? These things are not hard to do. Then the second thing we have to do is prove that you will lift the knife and that you will make the step. I think this is specifically what we do when we tell you that the betrayal and the fear of your future drives you to insanity because you don't know what is going to happen to you, because you're fearful, you're angry, you're regretful, you're revengeful, exactly for the background story that Darren explains to you about arrogance and cockiness and why this is likely going to fuel the way in which you believe you can do this. But look, this is a hard thing to say, but it's probably just not that hard to kill an individual. It happens quite often. I don't think that criminals are particularly strong or powerful or smart. I think they just do it because they're really angry, and I think anger drives a lot of people to do certain things. But let's respond more carefully to opening government then. What is it that they tell you? Basic morals and what it means to be in a gang, and these things are highly professional. This will be sending a message. This is a flip case of the opening government. Another reason why we take them on their own long diagonal. What does a gang fundamentally want, panel? They want to fight back on this type of injustice. They want to make sure that they get all the credit that Amitai also talks about. And then thirdly, they want to probably get more money, recruitment, like all of these beautiful things. If this is the case, then going in one person and risking this operation going wrong would have never happened. If they are professional, like opening government tells you, they would have sent 10 guys. There's literally not a world in which this wouldn't have been the case, right? You would have just as easily hedged your bet and make sure that this was going to happen more effectively. But I think Darren flips this even further when he tells you, if you want to send a message, you would have sent an even bigger one. You would have made this incredibly clear. You would have made sure that these things would have happened in a very specific way. Opening opposition tell you, you could have just, made it even harder and stuff. But I think opening government are correct to say things such as like, you have to drag it out. You have to know exactly how to kill the guy. You have to know a certain amount of things. But let's respond more carefully then to these singular individual mechanisms that they bring to us. Firstly, on the knowledge of doing this and how to make it last 15 minutes without the guy calling the phone, whatever. I don't think this is particularly hard. It takes probably one stab in the chest and one in the neck for you to not be like mobilized any further, right? You cannot just crawl with blood is flowing out of you. Like these things are not hard. Don't fall for this, panel. But even more so, if you were someone who was in a gang, why would this be the type of message that you choose to be sending? Why would you not mobilize on the streets? Why would you not make sure that you're doing all these things to the police in the status quo? Otherwise, why would you not make sure that you go in and scare the mayor so much that he would have to repeal these things, kill the mayor, like bodyguard in front of him, and make sure like all these other things would have made him do these things further in the future, right? I think there are many reasonable questions you can ask to opening government's case, particularly just on the credibility of like how strong a signal is this actually, how much professionalism does this actually take? What this takes is for someone, a single individual, to do something. We meet the burden exclusively on closing opposition to explain why one person will go into this house alone, risk their life to do this. That only happens when your world is turned upside down, when you believe you will get out alive, and even if you don't care because you've already lost everything that you will lose. For these reasons, put the guy to jail, the one guy, and vote CO.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fantastic